There's a moment in every art form when the old guard looks at the new generation and realizes something has fundamentally changed. For rock, it happened when punk arrived. For hip-hop, it happened when trap took over. For Prince, that moment came sometime in the mid-2010s when he turned on the radio and couldn't recognize what pop music had become. The Minneapolis sound architect who had shattered every boundary, who had forced MTV to integrate, who had fought record labels to own his masters, was now watching two artists dominate global charts with something that troubled him deeply. Ed Sheeran with his acoustic guitar and carefully calculated radio-friendly hooks. Katy with her candy-colored videos and algorithmic precision. Millions loved them. Billions streamed their songs. But Prince saw something different. He saw the culmination of everything he'd spent 40 years resisting. The corporate machine had finally perfected the formula. Not to create artists, but to manufacture them. Not to inspire audiences, but to satisfy them. Not to challenge culture, but to reflect it back in the safest possible way. And Prince, in his final years, couldn't stay silent anymore. So he picked up his pen and wrote words that would shake the music industry to its core. But what exactly did he write? Before we reveal what Prince discovered, if you want to hear more untold stories about music legends and the secrets they left behind, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Paisley Park in 2015 was more than a studio complex. It was Prince's kingdom, his laboratory, his sanctuary from an industry he'd spent decades battling. The 65,000-square-foot building in Chanhassen, Minnesota, housed recording studios, sound stages, and the vault. That temperature-controlled room containing thousands of unreleased songs and Prince's private archive. But there was another collection few knew about. Notebooks filled with meticulous handwriting, documenting his observations about music, culture, and the industry's evolution. In early 2016, Prince contacted Dan Piepenbring, a 33-year-old editor at the Paris Review, to help write his memoir. The book would be called The Beautiful Ones. Prince wanted it to be weird, controversial, and honest. Piepenbring spent 3 months at Paisley Park, attending private movie screenings where Prince laughed at Kung Fu Panda while wearing light-up sneakers, witnessing recording sessions, and slowly earning the trust of one of music's most guarded figures. During those visits, Piepenbring noticed Prince would occasionally pull out notebooks and read passages aloud, always carefully selecting what to share. Some entries were childhood memories. Others were philosophical musings about art. But there were thicker notebooks with worn covers that Prince seemed protective of. These contained his real-time observations about the music industry's transformation. And in these notebooks, 2 names appeared with increasing frequency: Ed Sheeran, Katy Perry. To understand Prince's concern, you had to understand what he'd built. The Minneapolis sound wasn't just a genre. It was a revolution disguised as pop music. In the early 80s, when MTV refused to play black artists and radio formats were rigidly segregated, Prince created something that couldn't be categorized. He fused funk with rock, new wave with R&B. He played every instrument, wrote and produced everything himself, and refused to let anyone define what his music should be. When MTV finally played Little Red Corvette in 1983, it was because his music was so undeniable they had no choice. But Prince's revolution went beyond sound. He fought Warner Brothers for ownership of his masters, writing slave on his face and changing his name to an unpronounceable symbol to escape their control. He won that battle, reclaiming his masters and proving an artist could survive outside the traditional system. Every move Prince made was designed to expand what was possible for artists. And for decades, it worked. The landscape changed. Then something shifted. Around 2010, As streaming services gained dominance and algorithms became the primary discovery mechanism, the industry found a new way to exert control. Not through contracts, but through data-driven curation. Prince watched this transformation with growing unease. He saw the streaming economy devalue music while platforms made billions. He saw songs engineered to trigger engagement without saying anything meaningful. Most troubling, he saw audiences accepting this as normal. But Prince had seen this coming 20 years earlier. In 2001, while most artists were still figuring out MP3s, Prince launched the NPG Music Club, one of the first subscription-based online music services. For a monthly fee, fans got exclusive tracks, live recordings, and direct access to new music without intermediaries. It won a Webby Lifetime Achievement Award for visionary use of the internet to distribute music. Prince understood something fundamental. The internet could either liberate artists or create new forms of controls even more powerful than record labels. By 2010, that prediction was becoming reality. Spotify launched in the United States, promising unlimited music access for $10 monthly. The pitch was seductive. Every song ever recorded, instantly available, supporting artists through micropayments per stream. Apple Music followed. YouTube became a primary listening platform. The streaming revolution seemed democratic, giving unknown artists the same access as superstars. But Prince saw through the promise to the economic reality underneath. The numbers were devastating. Spotify paid between 0.003 and 0.005 cents per stream. An artist needed roughly 250,000 streams to earn minimum wage for 1 month. And that payment got split between the artist, producers, songwriters, and label if one existed. A song with 1 million streams, a number that seemed massive, might earn the artist only $3,000 to $4,000 total. Meanwhile, Spotify's valuation climbed into billions. The platforms were extracting enormous value while artists earned pennies. Prince refused to participate. In 2015, he pulled his entire catalog from every streaming service except Tidal, the platform Jay-Z had launched specifically to give artists better terms and more control. Prince's reasoning was clear. Streaming services were the new record labels, controlling access to audiences while paying artists subsistence wages. They'd simply replaced physical distribution monopolies with digital ones. And because they controlled the algorithms determining what got heard, they had even more power than the old labels ever possessed. The industry called Prince outdated, stuck in the past, unable to adapt to new realities. But Prince's critique wasn't about nostalgia. It was about economics and power. He'd spent 40 years fighting for artists to own their work and control their distribution. Streaming services promised democratization but delivered a new form of exploitation, one where a handful of platforms captured the majority of revenue generated by millions of artists' work. What made Prince's position particularly powerful was his track record. He'd been right about MTV's homogenizing effect on black artists. He'd been right about record labels' predatory contracts. He'd been right about digital distribution's potential to devalue music. And now he was warning about streaming's economic model, predicting it would create a system where only the biggest artists could survive, while everyone else subsidized platforms that made billions. By 2025, 9 years after Prince's death, his warnings had proven prophetic. Studies showed the top 1% captured 90% of streaming revenue. Artists who once made decent livings from album sales now couldn't survive on streaming income alone, forced to tour constantly or find alternative revenue sources. The platforms had indeed become the new gatekeepers, their algorithms determining success or failure with even less transparency than the old label system. Prince had a ritual in his final years. Late at night, he'd scan through radio stations to understand what was reaching people. And repeatedly, he heard two artists. Ed Sheeran's voice, earnest and accessible, singing about universal themes. Katy Perry's productions, colorful and catchy, designed for maximum appeal. Both were massively successful. Both dominated charts globally. Both represented something Prince found concerning. It wasn't personal. Prince had never met either artist. Both were talented, hard-working people who genuinely loved music. But to Prince, they symbolized a fundamental shift in how pop music functioned. Sheeran's success came from being relatable and versatile, crafting songs that appealed across demographics. In interviews, Sheeran openly discussed this strategy, noting how different singles targeted different radio formats. Perry had become pop's most successful entertainer, delivering spectacle without controversy. To Prince, who'd built his career on challenging expectations, this represented a troubling trend. But there was something deeper that Prince recognized, something that went beyond these two artists individually. He saw them as emblematic of a larger transformation in pop music. The industry had learned to manufacture success through repetition and algorithmic promotion rather than innovation. Streaming platforms controlled discovery through playlists, determining what got heard based on engagement metrics. This created a feedback loop where familiar music got promoted because it kept people on platforms longer. Challenging or experimental music got buried. Artists adapted accordingly. Why risk controversy when it meant algorithmic punishment? The system incentivized consistency over experimentation. In March 2016, Prince wrote a letter, not for publication, but to articulate what he'd been observing. The letter was addressed to the music and media industries, and in it, he named names. The exact words, later discovered and included in The Beautiful One's memoir, were direct. We need to tell them that they keep trying to ram Katy Perry and Ed Sheeran down our throats, and we don't like it no matter how many times they play it. Dan Piepenbring understood the significance immediately. Prince rarely called out specific artists publicly. Piepenbring noted that Prince's frustration went beyond the artists themselves. What he was addressing was a culture that no longer allowed artists to deviate from proven formulas. The industry had perfected a system where taking risks meant reduced exposure. In an economy where streaming revenue determined survival, most artists couldn't afford experimentation. Prince's criticism wasn't about talent or work ethic. It was about what these artists represented in the industry's machinery. They demonstrated that the system rewarded predictability over innovation. To Prince, this signaled a fundamental shift. Pop music was no longer a force for cultural change, but had become content designed to maintain engagement metrics. What made Prince's critique powerful was his credibility. This wasn't bitterness about relevance. Prince remained creatively vital until his death, still touring and recording. In 2015, he'd praised Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly as pure art. He celebrated Janelle Monáe as an artist who refused to compromise. Prince wasn't opposed to modern music. He was concerned about the systematic elimination of space for challenging art. His analysis proved prescient. After Prince's death, discussions emerged about pop music's increasing formulaic nature. Ed Sheeran faced multiple plagiarism lawsuits, including cases involving Photograph, Shape of You, and Thinking Out Loud. While Sheeran won some cases and settled others, the pattern raised questions about whether pop music had become so standardized that coincidental similarities were inevitable. Music critics began examining what some called the streaming era's impact on creativity. Publications noted how algorithmic curation incentivized certain songwriting approaches. Katy Perry's career illustrated this dynamic. After massive success with Teenage Dream and Roar, her attempt at more socially conscious music with Witness underperformed dramatically. The message was clear. The system rewarded consistency, not evolution. April 21, 2016. 3 weeks after writing that letter, Prince was found dead at Paisley Park. The official cause was accidental fentanyl overdose, the tragic end to years of chronic pain from decades of high-intensity performances. He'd been seeking help for addiction, but time ran out. At 57, one of music's greatest artists was gone. The world mourned genuinely. Cities lit buildings in purple. Among the tributes were messages from Ed Sheeran and Katy Perry. Perry tweeted, "And just like that, the world lost a lot of magic. Rest in peace, Prince." The sentiment was sincere. Neither artist knew that buried in Prince's archives was that letter with their names. Neither knew they'd been identified as symbols of an industry trend he found troubling. When The Beautiful Ones was published in October 2019, that letter was included. Piepenbring debated whether to include such direct criticism, but felt Prince's observation was too important to omit. It wasn't about attacking individuals. It was about documenting what Prince believed was happening to pop music. The response was polarized. Some defended the criticized artists, noting their undeniable talent. Others saw Prince's critique as prophetic warning. Prince's observation went beyond two artists. He'd identified a fundamental shift in how the music industry operated. The old model gave labels power through distribution control. Artists who built audiences could eventually negotiate better terms or escape entirely. The new model was more subtle. Streaming platforms controlled discovery through algorithms that prioritized engagement over artistry. This created incentives where safe, familiar music got promoted while challenging work got buried. Ed Sheeran and Katy Perry weren't villains. They were successful artists who'd worked hard and understood the system they operated in. But their success demonstrated how the industry had evolved. The path to mainstream success now required understanding algorithmic promotion, playlist placement, and engagement optimization. Innovation became economically risky. After Prince's death, streaming generated millions from his catalog. His estate continued releasing music from the vault, reminding audiences of what they'd lost. Not just a performer, but an artist who believed music should challenge and transform. Prince wrote songs about God and sex, race and revolution. He built a career on refusing expectations. Prince had fought that future. He'd warned us it was coming. He'd named the artists he believed exemplified the system's victory over artistry. And 3 weeks later, he was gone, leaving behind a warning no one heeded and a question no one wanted to answer. If Prince couldn't survive refusing the system's terms, what chance did anyone else have? In his final years, he'd watched an industry that once had space for artists like him systematically eliminate those spaces through economic incentives that made risk irrational. Young artists trying to break through faced a choice: conform to what algorithms promoted or remain invisible. Most chose conformity. In an economy where streaming pennies determined survival, taking chances meant potential poverty. Prince's final warning wasn't just about two artists. It was about audiences who'd accepted algorithm-curated playlists as music discovery. About an industry that valued engagement metrics over artistic vision. About a culture that had stopped demanding music challenge us. He'd lived long enough to see his revolution become nostalgic reference points in safe songs. When Piepenbring published The Beautiful Ones, he emphasized what Prince had really been criticizing: wasn't two individuals, but a culture that no longer allowed artists to color outside the lines. A system that had learned to monetize predictability so effectively that innovation became economically irrational. The question Prince left unanswered was whether this could be reversed. Could pop music reclaim its potential to challenge? Could artists exist in the streaming era without conforming to algorithmic demands? Could audiences break free from curated playlists and demand something more? Or had the corporate machine finally achieved complete control disguised as infinite choice? Prince never finished his memoir. Those 3 months with Pen Bring produced only 28 handwritten pages from Prince himself. The rest was compiled from notebooks, artwork, and observations. But those pages contained more truth about artistry and integrity than most express in entire careers. Prince wrote about discovering music as salvation, about realizing he could create sounds no one had heard before. And he wrote about watching that possibility diminish for new generations. The memoir's title, The Beautiful Ones, came from a Prince song about desire and loss. Perhaps that was prophetic. Perhaps pop music, in becoming perfectly optimized for commercial success, had lost what made it vital. The mess, the risk, the danger, the possibility of being genuinely surprised by a song. Prince had spent his life proving music could be more than entertainment. It could be revelation. But in 2016, as he wrote that letter, he knew the belief was fading. 3 weeks later, he was dead. The letter remained hidden for 3 years. When it finally emerged, the industry it criticized had only become more entrenched. Streaming had grown more dominant. Algorithms had gotten more sophisticated. The space for artists who were colored outside the lines had shrunk further. Ed Sheeran and Katy continued successful careers, never knowing they'd been identified by one of music's greatest artists as symbols of an industry transformation. Prince's warning went largely unheeded. The system he warned about didn't just control what got heard. It shaped what people thought they wanted to hear. Not forcing artists to conform, but making conformity feel like choice. Not censoring challenging music, but making it economically invisible. Not destroying what Prince built, but letting it fade while convincing audiences they'd never wanted it anyway. The beautiful ones. Prince built something beautiful. The industry learned to monetize it. And the revolution was reduced to nostalgic aesthetic, safely consumed without risk of transformation. That's what Prince saw. That's what he tried to warn us about. That's what died with him. And we're still pretending everything is fine.